In a world of podcasts, one rises in the night to destroy them all. The elder god in an ocean of noise, the Cthulhu of the airwaves. This is Spoiler Country.
This is Spoiler Country, and I'm Melissa Sanchez. Today on the show, I have a New York Times best-selling writer and artist here to talk about her new series, Ash and Thorn. I'd like to welcome Mariah McCourt to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm good, a little tired, but I think that's probably everybody.
Yeah, exactly, right? The world is abruptly coming back to normal, I guess, right?
Yes, very.
Are you prepared for that and feeling comfortable about it?
I have a 6-year-old, so like I've had to be prepared for it for a while, you know, to make sure we can her transition back to doing more stuff and being out more is not totally overwhelming.
Right.
But no, I don't think I am. I just try to be.
Yeah. Now having a 6-year, I don't have kids. So is 6, is that preschool age yet or?
It is, technically she would be first grade starting next year. So it's like kindergarten, just wrapping up kind of thing.
Okay. That's nice too, because I know a lot of my friends have kids and they're kind of ready for them to have their friends back for one, and then to have their own space too and have a break.
Yeah. It's been tough. I don't know how people I just have my daughter, people who have more than one kid, it's got to be even harder managing everything and stuff throughout this. So just my heart's been going out to other parents throughout this whole situation, because it's just nothing but complicated for everybody.
Well, and especially if you work from home, right? Because you're a writer, and I can imagine that it's hard to find that time and space.
Yeah, it's definitely is a challenge. It's interesting because I've always worked from home with her, and she's been home with me since she was born. So that part of things hasn't changed. So I think for me, it was probably a little easier because that dynamic didn't shift. But my husband started working from home. He's a game designer. Okay. So during all of this, he's been here too, which was a big adjustment, because that's, now it's both mom and dad are here and they're here all the time. Right. We're always here, so there's always that kind of extra bit of stuff there. So I think no matter what people's situations have been, it's been complicated. It's been very, very complicated.
Yeah, I think it's been hard to definitely live with other people too. I mean, we live with people, right? But when you're in a pandemic and you're home all the time, it's like, okay, get away from me.
Oh yeah, no, it's very different. It's like no matter how much you love and like the other person, there is definitely that space thing where you're like, I have no real downtime. It's definitely different. It's been a bit better now that so many more people are vaccinated, even though little kids can't be. Since my daughter's under 12, there's no vaccine yet, but
I didn't know that.
So at least for little guys, it's still a bit tricky. She's really good about wearing a mask though, so that part hasn't been too bad. We just are careful when we go out and try to keep things outside, lots of air.
I've actually been really impressed with kids wearing masks because as it's hard to get them to do really anything, eat their vegetables. And the fact that I've seen so many little kids wearing the masks and not complaining.
I think I think at first it was like, why do I have to do this? Because she was 5, just turned 5 when it really shut down. So she was little, but they just get used to it really quickly. And if you're doing it too, I think that makes it a lot easier because they see you. And so they have an example of somebody doing it. So that does make some of it a little less complicated, which is why it would be frustrating sometimes to go out, people not wearing masks, and your kid's like, how come they don't have to? And I'm like, I don't have a good answer for this.
Yeah, it's hard to explain. There's been a lot of I'm sure really tough discussions and conversations with families that have children, especially. I can't even imagine what that's like. Hopefully it'll set a precedent, for the future. And
that's what I hope.
We'll see what happens. But, speaking of the future, you have just finished this amazing series, Ash and Thorn. For those who aren't familiar, just give us a brief, what it's about.
Sure. Well, the briefest, easiest sort of summary is Golden Girls meets Buffy. It's a lot more than that, but it's little old lady saving the world from cosmic danger. And it's got because it's Ahoy, we have a lot of humor, but it's not like jokey humor. It's not like here's a punchline, kind of a thing. It's a little more situational humor and sort of the how life can be funny even when things are really terrible.
Right.
Which was something that it was conceived of and written well before the pandemic happened, so it wasn't like a plan thing.
Right.
And then it came out during, and it ended up being like more relevant than I think any of us had been thinking about. So but yeah, the Sue Lee is the artist and Pippa Bowen's colors, and we have Jill Thompson's cover, and Todd Klein did the logo too, so it was kind of like a crazy amount of amazing people on it, so I feel very lucky.
That's awesome. Yeah, what was that like releasing it during a pandemic? Like just having I had a book launch during the pandemic too, so I know, but for our listeners, what did that feel like, not being able to get out there and promote it?
Oh, really weird. I mean, it was just really strange because you would do so much more stuff like in person than there would have been conventions and stuff too, at least local ones I try to get to, so there's that kind of stuff. So it had to be all online, and we did get, I have to say, an amazing amount of press and feedback and really lovely stuff. So it was very lucky. I think it's weird that because it came out during the pandemic, I think it might have actually been exposed to a broader audience than it might have been, because it is a bit of a niche kind of concept and comic. But having it be in the middle of this where people are looking for things to be sort of escapist, but also, have some larger purpose into it, I think that kind of helped the book sort of reach more people than it might have otherwise. So yeah, I mean, it was really strange. We waited for a while on it, even though we had stuff ready, because we didn't want to just like bombard people at the beginning of a pandemic with like, here, let's buy a book, because like super awkward, and
no, exactly.
Like a strange thing, and so much happened in the past year and a half. So yeah, there was always that kind of like, is there a good time to put this out? I don't know. Like, it just so many things, happening. So I'm glad that it seems to have been very comforting for a lot of people, because again, a lot of the stuff that we had come up with, it was before. So like the baking angle was something that was already built into the story, and we have recipes in the back and stuff.
That's great.
And that was stuff we just did because I like those things and other people. And it ended up being, people were doing a lot of home baking that they hadn't done before during the pandemic and things. So it ended up becoming this thing that had more like immediate relevance than I think we had necessarily thought it would. So
yeah, that was actually hilarious. I think I posted on Facebook once where everything I looked at was everyone was baking. Everyone was like Susie Homemaker, and
bread especially. Everybody I knew was doing sourdough, and I was like, I think that one is too complicated for me. I appreciate the effort people are putting into it, but I'm like, I don't think I have the energy for like a starter.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that seems like a whole thing there. I was like, wow, that's time consuming.
That was like too much. And the grocery stores, at least in my area, were completely out of baking ingredients, so I couldn't even jump on the bandwagon. yeah
My husband had started getting he had read some reports and things kind of early, so we bought some stuff, not knowing how things were going to get. So we ended up being lucky early on that we had that kind of stuff. But yeah, it was kind of wild, because I've always liked baking, so for me it wasn't like a new thing to get into,
right?
But I did end up doing a lot more of it, I think, because we just had more time, like doing those things. And it was definitely one of the ways with my daughter to keep her sort of occupied and enjoying stuff and doing hands-on things that were sort of fun and teaching different kinds of skills too. So and I think for a lot of parents, it became a thing that way too, because it was like, there's the comfort of it, but also just like, here's something to do.
Occupy their time so they don't get bored. Yeah, because there's only so much TV you can watch, and you have to like do something constructive and creative at some point.
There's only so many lessons you can do and other stuff too, where you're like, let's just do something kind of fun that everybody's probably going to enjoy out of this. And so I ended up trying out a whole bunch of recipes I hadn't before and things like that too. So it was like good for that.
That's awesome.
But yeah, a lot of people found it really comforting. A lot of people did it as part of I had very sweet messages from people who did some of the recipes, and that was like the first thing they shared with friends when they were able to do at least some social distance sort of meetups and stuff, which was really sweet, because I did things like tea cakes and stuff like that, so they were good like group.
That's fun.
So yeah, that was nice.
That's super cute. Now there's 5 issues. Is that
Yes.
a complete arc or are you doing more?
There it is. This is a self-contained ish. Like
Okay.
it's a complete story of like this particular thing, but yes, there are more planned stories. I have a bunch of different things that would be expanded on and stuff, since the first one is a much more sort of isolated to a really specific time and events that happen, and we didn't get to do as much world building or exploring as we would have wanted to do.
Okay.
So yes, there are more things planned, and we've talked to Ahoy about that and sort of when we can schedule that stuff, because like everybody's now with things opening back up and things shifting again, there's that whole like, okay, what can we balance and how are things kind of moving around? So
Right. With publishing schedules and everything.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's tough. Now, will it be like issue 6 or is it going to be like a spin-off series or a new
you know, I
thing?
don't know. I mean, it wouldn't be spin-off, it would be the same core characters and things. But it would be a different, it the first story I have in mind takes place not too long after the first storyline ends. So there'd be some time stuff. So it would might make sense to have it start just as like a different kind of, like, this was called, what did we call it? We called the whole thing something and then kind of move it on. So I
Okay.
personally like to do that. And
Yeah.
not like the monthly numbering, because I think that can be kind of overwhelming to people.
Right.
But it kind of depends on everybody's schedule and stuff, what we would decide to do.
Okay, interesting. Well, now I noticed you I've looked at your backlist and very cool, very exciting. I've noticed you have a thing for vampires, which I love. I'm a big vampire nerd.
Well, so what's funny is I have a thing for horror,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't have necessarily said like 15 years ago that I necessarily had a thing for vampires. Like I would have said I'm much more of a werewolf person, I think.
Okay.
But just ended up doing a lot of things with vampires. But now I very much enjoy doing them, and I like spending time with those kinds of characters. And there's just supernatural stuff kind of in general like that.
Right.
I really like. But yes, it is really funny how much it ends up being that. But I think that's kind of what happens once you start sort of in comics, when you start find like that, when there's sort of things that you sort of fit, people think of you for those things.
Yeah.
So it becomes that kind of thing where you get asked to do stuff in those genres more than you would say something else, which is fine by me. I love
Right.
horror stuff. So
Yeah. No, that's really cool. I saw that you did True Blood.
Mhm.
And Anne Rice. Anne Rice is one of my favorite authors.
yes.
How did that go? Were you able to consult with her at all? What was that like?
Oh yeah. So it's funny. Servant of the Bones was the book I adapted, and it's not a vampire. It's a ghost story, really, but it's a very deep sort of spiritual book about a lot of different kind of stuff going on. And yeah, I talked to her directly about that book because with her kind of work, you know, her prose is very rich and it's very detailed.
Yeah.
And taking that and adapting it to something like comics, you know, there's so much that you have to make sure it's coming across in the visuals, because you could not put all that prose, you know, in there. So yeah, I had to make sure that taking a book that size and then bringing it to like 6 issues, I think is what we did, was a lot. So wanting to make sure that we were getting it right, that my interpretation of scenes, or like, you know, the most important things in the story were coming across. Yeah, she was really great. She was really lovely. I mean, she's Anne Rice, so she could have been a real pain in the butt if she wanted to be.
Yeah.
She was not at all. She was lovely. She was really,
That's so
really
good.
lovely.
That's so good to hear. That's awesome to hear when you because she's so talented and like you said, she's so descriptive. And I would imagine you would feel a little bit of pressure, you know, when you get a job like that.
Well, it's such evocative work, and people feel really strongly about her stuff too. So it isn't like there's work out there that people like, but like are less invested in. And I don't think she's really ever done anything that's like that. People are really, you know, invested in her work. So yeah, that was only sort of it, especially the story too is such a I think an unusual story, and I think also unusual for a lot of her work. So it was that much more important that we, you know, honor the stuff that was being done in it, and that people who already, you know the book, we're going to have it be a good experience for them. And then also anybody who maybe wasn't familiar with it could get something out of that too.
Yeah.
Since it isn't the vampire stuff and it isn't the most well-known of her things that way,
Right.
It was an interesting challenge like that, because I think people would have assumed that we would have done vampire stuff, but that's why I liked the challenge of it, honestly, where it was playing around with really different things, and there's a huge historical component and, you know, all this other stuff involved. So yeah, and like I said, she has such rich prose that adapting something like that is a challenge, because you don't want to lose any of that, but it has to become visual. It has to become part of the medium that it's going to be in.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
that was what we worked on most, I think.
Yeah, and I could see it drawing fans to both sides, like you were saying, people that are, I mean, Anne Rice is very well known, but I'm sure there are some younger generations that haven't, read her work, and maybe they just solely read comics or whatever. So I could see it definitely pulling fans.
And also, I think the visual language of comics for some people is a little less overwhelming. I think if you, I love prose, but really dense prose can be for certain kinds of people, like as readers, it can be a little daunting to be like, oh, can I really get into this? And, am I gonna, that kind of thing, because it is a time investment and stuff like that. And it's not that comics aren't, or like they're less deep or anything like that, but it is 6 issues. It was a less of a time commitment than that. And it was relaying it in a different way because the visuals are there. It's not just you having to like picture it and experience it differently. Yeah, and adapting work is really, really interesting from one medium to another because there's a whole lot of shifts and things that you have to consider. Even when it's something like True Blood, where it's not, I mean, we weren't adapting the books, we were adapting kind of like continuing the show or telling different stories from it. But in a way, there's a lot of adaptiveness to that because you still have to make sure you're matching the tone of the show and how characters speak and some of the visuals, but you can't tell it the same way that a show would because the language is different from one to the other. So yeah, I've learned a lot from adapting different stuff into comics, honestly, because it's each time it's different and how you have to focus things and what the core of any story is really have to be clear to get it right. So but that's what's so important about being able to have access to the creator like that. I think it definitely makes the experience better, and I definitely think you end up with happier readers.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Because they can see that consistency for sure. Because they're expecting, the reader expectation is something that, people love to pick stuff apart anyways too. So, you have to be prepared for that. But at the same time, with True Blood, did you have to, you said it was more based on the show. Did you just consult with the showrunners?
Yes.
And did we had Arlene Harris come into it at all?
No, no, and it's funny because I had read some of the books, the Sookie Stackhouses and stuff, and it's interesting how different they are from the show.
Yeah.
So I had to kind of put that aside completely because if those things it's like crossing the streams, it would have been a little bit weird.
Right.
So yeah, no, we came up to LA and we talked to Alan Ball and his head writers on the show at the time, and we went through kind of what we thought could work for it, and we kind of went back and forth and we broke it down with them so that we had a good structure going in, because they had things that they were doing with the show that we didn't want to step on, so to make sure that these were events that were separate, that are not like related to the things currently, that weren't exactly what's happening on the show, but still interesting to the audience.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting balance to kind of to hit on. So we did focus, I think in the first one, it was more sort of backstories of some of the characters, things that they had done before, because then it wasn't going to fiddle with anything having to do with that was currently going on. And then later stories, we were able to sort of branch out a little bit more because the show had, so there were places we could take it because the show had been there or done different kinds of things. So we knew timeline stuff. But yeah, they were really great too. HBO and Alan and them, they were super supportive. They always got back to us really quickly about things and would let us know if there was anything they had a really big issue with. And that was nice too, because again, with licensors and stuff that you're working with like that for a work, it matters because again, you have fans who have a certain kind of thing. I have to say, True Blood fans were lovely.
Are they? Oh, that's awesome.
Really, really lovely people. Yeah, they were just super excited about more stories, and that was really nice. They were just like, yay.
I feel that way about I'm a big Vampire Diaries fan, and I feel like it's the same type of community where we're just happy to get any type of a story.
I think that was really true of it. I guess they've talked about relaunching or I don't know how how they would do that, but I have to say that the ones from the the first show and everything were really very nice. They were all, especially at conventions and stuff, when they were coming up for signings and stuff, they were super sweet. And just positive about the show, having a good time with it. They knew how bombastic it was, so they didn't have expectations of the comics to be something that they weren't going to be. It was nice. It was nice, and that the best compliment we got from people is that they could hear the characters' voices.
Oh wow, yeah, that
was nice, because that's hard, and that's the thing when you're going from these people are speaking and they know how to do that, so you're like, how do we get this without everybody? I didn't want to fall into the trap, especially with Southern characters. Did not want to fall into the trap of having everybody speak in the same really funky Southern accent in a
Same
comic.
drawl, yeah.
Yikes. Because that just starts to sound really weird. So you have to really make sure that you're using the appropriate words and terms at the right times and stuff. So there's a lot of things like that. But yeah, I had to say that fandom was really lovely.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I feel very lucky. I've been very lucky on the stuff that I've worked on that way.
That's great. And I think the comics are a great like medium for when a show does end or get canceled. You know, I've got Jericho comics and you know, even movies where there's just one movie but people want more story, like 30 Days of Night. It's really interesting how you can satisfy that fan base.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there's a nice building on that thing. I mean, I think some are more successful than others, but that's, you know, the nature of those kinds of things. I think what's nice is like I know when I was at IDW, and it's been a while now, but like they were doing a lot of things like X-File comics. Yeah. Because like you could keep, you know what I mean? Like there's plenty of that. There's plenty of things to keep going. And yeah, it does work really well for things that, you know, have ended in one place, especially if they haven't gotten to have their real ending. I think that's something that closure for people where like whatever form you get that in, whether it's like sometimes it's like a movie, like I'm a huge Farscape person, so having like the Peacekeeper movie was like, oh thank God, I'm not just stuck with the end of season 4, which was like a huge cliffhanger, and I was like, oh no. And other things like that where you get a little bit more of a sense of closure, I think is nice too. But then also the continuing of those stories, because a lot of them still work. You know, it's a different experience, but it still works.
Yeah, it's still definitely it gives, like you said, that satisfying finale when you're left with all these questions and answers and you're like, okay, I can't see it on the big screen, but at least I get some kind of
for me that's always important, that people like it's like something like Ash and Thorn, like yes, there's more story there, but I didn't want it to end in such a way that people would be like, well, ugh, like I don't feel satisfied by this story at all, because like I know I don't like that feeling. Like I like the feeling of, and yes, if we decide to, there's more to tell. But I don't like the feeling of like nothing was resolved and I feel just like a dangling thread. To me, that's like
finality. Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of, because, you know, the industry, there's so much competition right now with television shows. I mean, I think they're bigger than film at the moment. And I feel like a lot of shows now, when they're in their first season, they do actually film. If they don't know if they're going further, they film it to where there is finality, because they don't want to disappoint a bunch of people if the network doesn't renew it. It seems to be kind of a trend, you know.
Especially with, you think the way some of things work, you know, at least with comic stuff, we'd usually get some kind of warning when something was going to be, you know, like done. Like something like this, like Ash and Thorn, you know, we the way that they sort of talk about it is like seasons. So they sort of structured it a bit like this. So the idea is you're thinking about it that way. So leave yourself open to stuff, but tell something that's got a, you know, a good closure, sort of, for at least for what the story is that you're currently telling. But you know, you can have room for more stuff. I do prefer to work that way, I think, personally, and I always have an end goal no matter what I'm writing, because for me, I can't really write if I don't know, even in general terms, where something is headed. How it gets there can change, and maybe all the details of what that ending are different, but I generally speaking need that, like, this character, this is where the goal was to get them here and the story to go there. And again, if that shifts and things, like, you have to be flexible. But I think, you know, I think that kind of helps. And I think readers can and viewers can tell. I think they can tell. People are very savvy these days. So they're like, they don't know what they're doing. They usually, like, they're often not wrong, you know, where you're like, oh yeah, no, they really didn't, you know, and that happens too. And the nature of things has shifted a lot in the past couple of years, you know, how a lot of stuff is done, because there's so many different networks now. And
oh my gosh, so many.
Yeah. And
it's
there's
crazy. Yeah. And I know what you're talking about. There are shows that I've watched in the past. I'm not going to name any, but specific shows that were popular that I loved. And you could literally tell that the writers were making stuff up as they went.
There are times where I would watch things and I'd be like, oh, this is the moment. This is where they stop knowing where this is going.
Yeah. This is where like, they lost it.
Past where the plan was, you know, like where, or they didn't have one. You know, like they had one for this one season, but they definitely didn't after that. And like, and I don't want to be too judgmental. I mean, it's none of it's easy or any of that. And, you know, there's also the magic, like for certain shows, you know, 5 seasons because of a certain amount of episodes. So people are trying to reach those goals, you know, like there's so many complicated things going on there. But yeah, there's definitely times where you go, oh, Yep. Nope. We lost where
Right. Like,
somebody changed their mind.
They
or,
have
like,
no
it just-
idea. Yeah.
they just didn't expect to get this far, or like something happened.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, would you say that you are like a staunch outliner?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I always do, for any of my work. I always do like, and it's stuff that a lot of it's stuff that no audience would ever see,
Mhm.
but a lot of world stuff, because for me, I need to know how certain things work so that when characters are doing something, it makes sense and I'm not being like weird and inconsistent. And backgrounds for the characters too, so that they have a history that at least I am aware of and that I can use in different ways. But yeah, I always outline everything, the whole story from start to finish first. And then smaller into the storylines and then the individual issues, because it's just for me personally, formatting those kinds of things that way makes it easier to be more flexible, in fact, because
Yeah.
I have that kind of like the outline of structure. And so if I do need to move something or it doesn't work in that space, I'm not going to like completely fall apart. Like the whole
Right.
thing isn't going to disintegrate. But I'm like,
Yeah.
no, but I still know that I need to get here, like so that makes that easier. So yeah, that's for me, definitely.
Yeah, I find it much easier too. I tried once to be a pantser and it didn't work out because I
Yeah, I
just
just
got
can't do it.
lost and I had so many plot holes that it took me longer than I would normally take to write a book.
Yeah, there's the
know?
same thing for me. And I do a lot of pre-work. Like I tend to pre-break down my scripts pages and stuff so that I'm not staring at a blank page and
Yeah.
just like starting. I already
Exactly.
have some of that stuff at least right roughly there. It's a lot easier to start when you've already got some of that stuff there, so you're not just staring at something where you're like,
What do I do? Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's really hard. That first page, that first
Mhm.
blank page is extremely hard. But like you said, if you have an outline, and you've got the scenes mapped out, and I know
Yep.
with comics it's a little different than prose, but and you have panels and you have artists and
Yeah.
that you work with. And now do you you are an artist, so do you do your own art at all for the same thing you're working on?
Not usually. No, I've done a couple of my own like personal comics.
Okay.
But I haven't done, because my storytelling skills are much more illustration of the sort of single variety, usually not storytelling like comic style. And I tend to be really cautious about that because I know how hard it is.
Mhm.
And
Right.
I don't want to just like tell a story really badly, because what I can write versus what I can draw don't always match up.
Okay. Yeah,
But it
that's
does
fair.
make me more sensitive to, I hope, to the artists that I work with and what I'm
Right.
asking them to do. I do think most writers should try drawing their own comic sometime, even if it's like a stick figure.
Mhm.
Like you're not an artist, but you're just write the script and then try to draw the thing that you have scripted in some fashion, because I think a lot of writers would find that they are asking impossible things,
Mhm.
like multiple emotions in a single panel, which you can't show, or how often you've overused a particular action or underused them, or you haven't really split up the page and stuff. So I do think that for more writers that would be a good thing, so that they can kind of take a look when they're asking somebody like, draw this huge cityscape with a million cars.
Right.
Like,
You're
are
like,
you
thanks.
sure? Like, there's some artists who love that, but make sure the one you're working with loves that, because that's a big ask,
Yeah.
things like that. Like I like big elaborate spread pages,
Mhm.
because I think they're very effective for storytelling and they open up things. They can be really, really great for certain kinds of moments, but it's a lot of artistic work because they're big.
Oh yeah.
And so you have to make sure that you're asking somebody something that they can still do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Things like that.
Walking Dead does that really well.
Mhm.
Their comics are always so detailed, and I
Yeah.
always think, God, that artist. I mean, yeah, I think they have multiple artists on different issues,
Mhm.
but what a huge undertaking, like you were saying, to do these like massive spreads with all these buildings and the zombies and all that stuff. I can't even imagine. People tend to like forget that the artist does just as much work as the writer.
Well, they do. Honestly, from a physical standpoint, they do far more.
Mhm.
Just the hours and time it takes to make a comic is far, I mean, even my slowest script is not going to take as long, for an artist to do. Like if I do a 20-page comic, that might take me, if I'm slow, like a week.
Oh wow.
But that's going to take an artist at least a month to draw that.
Yeah.
Like it's just because that's the nature of how that works. So yeah, I think that the industry expects a lot from artists, also
Mhm.
colorists and letterers who
Yeah.
are part of the art team. we expect a lot of turnaround in extremely tight and absurdly tight deadlines. And then are like, why are people burnt out? I'm like, yeah, I can't imagine why somebody would be burnt out. How? So yeah, I mean, and from the editorial perspective of having done that for so many years, like I look at schedules sometimes and I think, what on earth is this publisher thinking? Like, there is no way that can be done. You will definitely be behind schedule.
Right.
And God forbid somebody gets sick
Mm-hmm.
or just needs like a weekend.
Mental health day. Yeah.
Yeah. We don't think about that enough, that the physical, nature of, yes, I know it's not like working on the, in the coal mine kind of physicality,
Right.
but it is time and energy and, there's repetitive motion stuff. There's all kinds of things, not to mention just the creative process of figuring out how to lay out a page, and doing all these kinds of things. It's a lot. So
yeah.
And it's not that I think artists don't work hard or put a lot of time in. I think writers is what I meant there. Writers, it's just that it's different. It just is like writing a script is just very, very different than drawing it.
Yeah. And not a lot of people know that, because I mean, I think most people are one or the other. I very rarely meet or talk to people that do both. And so that's just, that's really interesting to hear, someone like yourself who knows both sides and understands it. And I would assume, you would probably be much more like accommodating when you are working with an artist.
I really try to be, because I wouldn't want an artist to feel, and also, I mean, it's a collaborative process. Like, it shouldn't be something where anybody is dictating to somebody else.
Right.
Doesn't matter who, like the idea or those kinds of things, like it still should be a relationship that works back and forth, and they should have as much input as you. Otherwise, there's just really no point. Like, that's the whole thing about it, is that it's collaborative. And it's the same thing from the editorial perspective on it. I mean, that's what you're doing, is you're facilitating people working together and creating something together. So without that working, there's just disaster. Right. So that tends to be my philosophy on it. Anyway, I always tell artists, because like I can have very strong visual ideas in my scripts. Like, I definitely am very visually oriented in my writing. But I always tell them, I'm like, if you have a different idea, feel free, like whatever makes it easier for you. And you have to back on some of that. Like, I will tell them if something is really essential, like we need to see X in this panel, because it's blah blah. But but aside from that, I try to be really flexible, because it is asking a lot. And I've definitely had times where I've looked back at my script and gone, did I really ask somebody to draw that? Like, oof,
you're like,
that was
sorry.
a lot. Sorry. Let's maybe not do so much of that next time. I that's definitely a thing. You kind of learn, and as you go, you sort of, make sure, and especially when you work with people more than once, and you guys get comfortable with like how somebody else works, that helps a lot too.
Yeah, I bet you got used to each other's processes and habits, and like how long you can expect something, that type of thing.
Yeah, and what's helpful to them versus another artist is very different. Some people like a lot of guidance, they prefer it, and some people really would prefer like dialed way back and stuff. So and it's the same thing with coloring. The coloring is a huge part of it and sets the tone for scenes, and lettering, how much you're crowding is the thing. Like, I think writers often, a bit of the writer ego tends to happen a lot in comics, and we like to get dialogue and stuff in there because it's showing off our writing.
Right.
But it may be completely disastrous to the story you're telling. It may be just, and you just end up with like you can't see anything in the art really, or it's just redundant.
Yeah.
So I always do a really big editing pass once I've seen art on lettering and stuff, and be like, let's just cut.
Yeah.
A lot of it's just like, that doesn't need to be there, because I think you kind of have to dial back your own ego and sort of preciousness about those things. Because there's a lot of that. Like, I see stuff sometimes and I go, it's a clever line, but it wasn't strictly necessary, and it kind of gets in the way. So you have to sort of learn to pull back on that a little bit.
You're like, does it move the story forward? If not, can we do it?
Yeah, it's actually been why I've written a couple silent comics in the past couple of years. Like, I did that for myself, where there was no dialogue or anything in the ones that I drew. And then I just worked on a project for it's a charity thing for different environmental causes. And the comic I wrote for that, I worked with a musician who's Beatty Wolf. She's here in LA and she's lovely. But I made sure the comic, the only dialogue it has in it is lyrics from her song.
Oh, cool.
And like some sound effects and some words that are in the background, but the actual comic itself is silent, because I was like, I don't think this really needs like clever stuff. Like I think it should just be the visuals telling this particular story.
Yeah.
And I'm pleased with how that came out, because I think it's important to not always rely on the dialogue telling you everything, to let sort of some things be more evocative and more leave an impression and more open to interpretation, to people. I think is a good thing to do depending on what you're working on. So yeah, I was happy with being able to do that. So yeah, I try to challenge myself with everything that I'm doing that way, and figuring out something new, because it's kind of the creative process. So if you're not learning something from it, it's going to get stale kind of quickly. So
Yeah, you have to keep yourself challenged and stimulated. Otherwise, yeah, you're going to get bored. You're going to lose interest. And speaking of that, I saw that you worked on a card for the literary tarot.
I did, yes.
So awesome. What was your card, and like what inspired you to do that one?
So there was a whole list of all the like the public domain, these wonderful works of literature. And I knew when they approached me, I was like, oh, I really, really want to do a Jane Austen. And I have a couple favorites there. And I was really hoping that I would get to do Persuasion. And thankfully nobody else had picked it. So I was very happy about that.
Awesome.
And I was going through different cards, sort of trying to figure out, because the dual nature of the story is really specific. That sort of, it's not a romance, I think, the way people are often think of them, with like this, something like Pride and Prejudice, people are very, very familiar with. Persuasion is a more melancholy story. It's softer. It's about love that was thwarted. And eventually there's the happy ending, but it takes time. And it has a lot to do with growing older and being a more mature person and realizing mistakes and emotional growth and things like that. So it's actually really great for like a tarot card. Like there's a lot there. So they the Brink folks had they made specific different things for their deck that are literary focused. So there's quills and blah blah blah. So like in place of pentacles is parchment. And I believe it's 5 of Pentacles is the one so 5 of Parchment, I think, is the one. But anyway, the card itself was a representation of, it has the straight reading, if the card comes straight up, and that's the more melancholy interpretation, that you've had things not work out, that there's something holding you back. You maybe weren't forthright about your feelings and what you really wanted, and that's caused you to not have quite the things and the life that you were hoping for. And then there's the reversal, which is those things, but you've become a stronger, more emotionally mature person, and you're able to now deal with those things and do that kind of stuff. So it was nice to have that card to work with that way, because it allowed to have both meanings of the story be present in the card and for the reading, so that hopefully when people use the cards, they can apply that and find something meaningful out of the story. So that's one of the things that I thought was always really beautiful about it, is it's a story that starts from 2 people who did very much care about each other, but through difficult circumstances, just separated when they're very, very young, and they come back together when they're older. Like I think it's might be 10 years or something. I forget exactly how long it is. They're not like old, but they're older, and they've learned some different things, and life is different and more complicated and things like that. And in a lot of ways, it's better that they're together now that they have those experiences and they've matured and are different people in certain ways, and their core character is the same. They're still decent people, but they've learned certain things. So yeah, that was something that was really lovely. And I love seeing the other cards and stuff too, because good Lord, the people involved in this are like, I don't know what I'm doing in that crowd.
I interviewed Danny Hedlund, and she's listing off all these people that are involved, and I'm like, what? This is amazing. I mean,
I don't know how I even close in there, but I was like, holy. Yeah, when I saw the list of people so far, I was like, Roxanne Gay. I'm like, yes, I would like to be involved. Holy goodness.
Margaret Atwood. I'm like, is there a Handmaid's Tale card, please?
Yeah, what I love about it is seeing what people picked, what books had meaning to them and how they were applying that to the cards. And also, I mean, what Brink does as a group is so wonderful, the literacy and advocacy that they do. So it's really nice to contribute to something like that. And it's the same thing with this. Why am I blanking on the name? It's I think it's Reimagining Extinction. It's very focused on helping groups of endangered species, and specifically getting funding to help certain ones so they reach the goal and they're able to really like do a meaningful change.
That's awesome.
And that's another one that has like a crazy crazy list of people. There's Cara Devaney is one of the first people involved who worked with Kieran Gillen and other artists. And
Wow.
there's just like, it's just an ongoing list of people and stuff. But it's a lot of that, I think, this year for people has been wanting to contribute something creatively in a meaningful way, where it's not just about you and making a living, but it's about something a little bigger than yourself. So it was nice to be involved in two projects where there was something bigger going on with it, where it's like, it's nice to have that and the creative part, but also it's really nice to be able to, especially like the literary tarot, like the funding on that went way
Yeah, that was
way above so fast.
insane.
So
I
that's
couldn't
really
believe
great.
it. Yeah, it it got funded super quick, and
Mhm.
just even after it reached the goal, there's just so many more
Kept going.
backers coming out,
great.
and I mean, it's a really cool deck. I mean, we had talked in depthly about the design and the
Yeah, it's
box that
beautiful.
comes in and everything. And are you excited to get your copy?
Yes, I am. I haven't done tarot in quite a number of years, but it was something that I did quite a lot when I was younger because I think Kelly Sue had a really great thing. She was talking about how she uses it in her creative process. Sometimes if she feels like she's got a block,
Yeah.
or just sometimes when you're trying to figure something out, you're like, why can't I quite get there with this? And I've used it in that way too, that I find very useful, where it's like, oh, you make connections that you for some reason hadn't been, or whatever it is. And I like having something that you can apply in those ways is really nice.
Oh yeah.
So I have so many friends who do it for a lot of different reasons. So it'll be nice to have like something that they can look at with the literary connection, because they've taken so much time with the art. Like, it looks really lovely. So it's also going to be a nice, substantial looking.
Yeah, I mean, it just, I'm definitely gonna get a deck as well. I collect tarot decks and absolutely love them and use them for multiple purposes. One being what you were saying about, when you're stuck on a plot or creative thing, they can be very useful to sort of spark ideas. And I feel like there was a literary deck I purchased a long time ago, and it was nice, but it was sort of, it fell a little flat. So I'm looking at this one and I'm like, oh my God, these images and just the stories and the things that people wrote in the booklet,
Yeah, I think people really, what's nice about this is the way that Brink went about it, and Danny, was that they really wanted to make sure you felt a connection to the story that you picked in the card, so that it wasn't something that felt, just kind of random.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really what's made it special, and you can tell that from how it looks and how the different contributors have talked about it too. Is they found these really great ways to take books and stories that they love, and like I loved seeing that kind of stuff. It's like, oh, I wouldn't have thought of that for this one, but yeah, no, that actually is perfect, or those kinds of things. So it's nice seeing other stories, things that I love, getting turned into, seeing how people interpret the meaning from them and things. Yeah, I think that's really nice. Then that way that tarot gets used, and people are able to interpret different things from it for their life, or for whatever it is they need to. It's nice seeing literature being used that way, because it's very much within their whole message. With Brink and the literacy aspect, and really looking at writing and stories and how they impact your life, and the way that can help other people. And once they've given those skills and resources, and helping better pay and people who are incarcerated. I mean, it's a whole lot of stuff that they're doing that's really great. So I'm really, really happy that it funded the way that it did. That was awesome. Really amazing. And that's a nice thing to see, where you're just like, oh, good, people responded to it the way you hope. Yeah. Course. That's always really nice.
And it's, like you said, it's for a great cause. And there's so much going on right now. And I do want to ask you about some stuff that's been going on Twitter, and
no, it's okay.
Being a woman in an industry that's, well, every industry pretty much, but
I know, I feel like I have to say all the time, where I'm like, in this industry, I'm like, but let's be real, it's all of them.
Pretty much all of them.
At this point, it's everywhere.
It's just, it's like a plague in itself. So, what are your thoughts? I mean, I'm thoroughly disgusted, but and I'm sure a lot of women are. What is your take, being more of an insider than I am, I guess, being in the comic industry?
Oh, disgust is a big one. Frustration, I think, is the other one, because it keeps being this awful cycle. I feel like that we keep kind of having to go through, where it's like every few months, and it's like, guess what? Somebody else is terrible, and it's exhausting too, because, at this point, I'm, I guess, an older person in the industry, which feels like a weird thing to say, but like, I've been doing it for 20 years. So like, that's just true. I have been doing it a while. and like it's none of it's new. It's the same kind of gross patterns. And I think for me, the biggest thing right now has been making sure that people who are younger, who are new to the industry in particular, understand the rights that they have, whether we're talking about weird interactions with other creators or publishers or people being inappropriate, and that they have the right to say something and to not tolerate it. Like they shouldn't feel like they have to, that's just like the price you pay for being in the industry, because yuck.
Yeah.
That's just not acceptable to me at all. And the other thing is also, I do think it goes hand in hand though in comics with a generally kind of exploitive way that we can be about people, about their time, about their creativity. We are often very reluctant to pay people what they're worth and take the time to develop things and not do things that I personally think are ethically questionable. And I think all of those things together make this kind of really unpleasant soup. And it is a small industry. Like the thing about comics itself is that it's little. It's not like tons and tons of stuff. And there's a lot of amazing creators and a lot of people making just amazing stories. And I hate the fact that so many are subjected to things that they leave understandably, or just feel in general like it's just not a safe place to be because it's comics. Like that's awful. Like that should not be the way that we handle ourselves. We should be so much better than that, because we absolutely can be. And at this point, these things have happened enough where it's not like it's not new. And yet you still have people who are like, oh, I'm so surprised. And I'm like, okay, can we just like knock that off? Somebody being, and this is something that's come up a lot recently, I think. And it's something that I do hope, and it's something I've talked about quite a bit on Twitter, because it's something that's important to me, and a realization that I had to come to in the past bunch of years, which is that regardless of how somebody has treated me, like if somebody can be really great with me and that's wonderful and I'm very happy about that, it has no bearing on how they treated somebody else. And wouldn't it be great if that was the case? But it's not. And so people can have radically different experiences with somebody, and somebody who's safe to me can be completely not to someone else. And we need to have those hard conversations, even about people that we really like. We have to have the conversations ourselves about things that we may have said or done that weren't right, and we're able to say that and recognize that, and hopefully do something about it, take action, and either make amends in some way or change our behavior. But the constant call to silence things, for people not to talk about stuff, that you're canceling somebody, which is just ridiculous.
So dumb.
I'm like asking for like bare minimum consequences of like admitting somebody did something wrong and just doing some basic stuff. I'm like, that's not canceling. That's not. It's not. And I personally just have a great deal more sympathy for the people who have been hurt, who have been targeted, especially. I mean, honestly, it has to be said, there are a lot of serial abusers who do this over and over and over again. And you look at it and it basically it's like a generation of people end up targeted. It's awful.
No, it's 100%. I'm 42. And
me too.
Yeah. Oh, good.
High five. Yeah.
Yay. Yay for 4 days.
Yep.
And like you were saying, I completely agree with you. Just because someone doesn't do it to you, I'm a very tough, strong person, and not to say no one else is, but I exude something like a don't F with me kind of a thing. So I tend to just snowball over some of that stuff. And I also everyone has their own limit and threshold of what bothers them, and that's your own personal right. I might find a joke funny and another woman might find it offensive, and that's their right to feel that way. And I think what's happening from what the trend I'm seeing, and I hate that it's a trend, is that a lot of these young women that are being targeted are young women, they're trying to get into an industry, and they're afraid of rocking the boat. They're afraid of pissing anyone off because they'll get blackballed. And then when you have comic book companies still agreeing to showcase this person's work after they've already been accused by 60 plus women, that just makes everyone go, oh, I maybe I should just keep my mouth shut.
Well, and I think that's the thing. We haven't seen much in the way of consequences. There's been very little. And people will go away for a few months and people go, oh, that's atonement. It's done. Right. And I'm like, is it? I'm like, because like I have a 6-year-old and like I have to teach her about consequences, and that's not how they work. Right. It's not just like they get to forget about it and never deal with it. Consequences for actions is like, no, and then we don't get to do this thing. And, and there's a series of things and you have to learn that stuff. And there's degrees, of course, to things. But, I was pretty ticked off when I saw, just basically like, well, I don't like canceling people or, forever punishing them. I'm like, it's been less than a year since this particular situation was even
absolutely
broadly talked about. I'm like, that's not, and nothing had been done. Now, I think recently, just on Twitter in the past like couple of hours, there was an email and some kind of overture was made, which I'm glad to see.
Okay.
And it's not up to me to forgive people who haven't wronged me. So it's the people who have been wronged to decide that kind of stuff. But yeah, I do get very frustrated by it because I feel like we just keep having the same conversation over and over again. People keep going, yeah, it's terrible. Mm-hmm. And then nothing, and constantly the question is always like, well, what do you expect people to do? And I'm like, actually, people have very helpfully put together lists.
Yeah, there's a lot of
that
stuff.
Can be done. Actionable things. Mm-hmm. It's not actually that complicated, but usually the first step in anything is saying, I did something wrong, and not with a caveat, not with like a but or a, it was okay, I did something wrong. Those kind of things. I did something wrong. I am sorry. And I will, at the very least, learn steps that I can take. I don't, there's different things that in different situations require different things. Mm-hmm. But, there's so many of us folks have put together pretty comprehensive and I think generous list, for instance, of actionable things that can be done that are meaningful, that aren't just saying something, kind of casually, or, that are real things that can be done.
Or saying you're sorry because you got caught, essentially.
Right. Like is very different than a meaningful apology of like, I really did do something wrong that it caused actual trauma to people, and I know a lot of people like to dismiss those things. They don't want those things to be true because it's uncomfortable. They don't want to have that conversation. Right. They don't want to investigate their own actions. Probably. I suspect none of us do. I don't think there's many people who want to look back at themselves and come up with the conclusion that they may have been wrong or done something that really hurt someone else.
Right.
But the likelihood is that we have at some point. Hopefully not to a degree of 60 plus people having to come forward about you.
That's serial right there,
But that is just a huge problem.
Yeah.
But, we do need to look at that stuff. And I think we all need to get a bit more uncomfortable about that in those conversations. Mm-hmm. And it's hard. I mean, I think everybody gets naturally defensive about stuff like that. But ultimately, the choices that we make and the stands that we take do impact the things that we do. They impact how people see us. Mm-hmm. And if we do want people to feel safe or safer, because total safety I don't think is necessarily possible. But if we want people to feel safer, we have to really like put in the work to make them feel safer. And we can't just dismiss something every time it comes up like, well, but I like that person. They were nice to me. Okay, great. I'm glad, but they weren't to somebody else. Yeah. And maybe it's a line that's not as much of a big deal to you, but it can be profoundly a big deal to somebody else.
Absolutely.
And yeah, it's an ongoing conversation and it is very frustrating. And I try not to get angry on Twitter all the time because it's not really the most productive use of time or advocacy really, but I still sometimes just feel like certain things just have to be said. I don't know why I feel like I need to say them. Right. I don't know that anybody's like, I don't know that I personally am like, gonna be that helpful, but I don't know. It's just, I just want people to know that they're not alone because I have had some of those experiences myself and it's awful and it's very isolating.
Yeah.
And especially when people are telling you you're taking it too seriously or it's not a big deal or you should have done it this way or handled it differently. It's a very frustrating and upsetting thing because people don't really know unless they're in a situation how they would respond to things. Mm-hmm. And it's hard. Like you said before, that you're a strong person and it's not because other people aren't strong that these things happen. But I can know for myself, I'd love to say that in certain situations that I got tough and was, responded in the way I would have liked to, but unfortunately I didn't. In several situations, I just froze completely.
Yeah.
And,
I know, and I've had those situations too, definitely when I was younger, especially, because you're not expecting it. You're just,
older, I seem to not give a crap as much.
Right?
But,
well, I think once you turn 40, you're just like everybody F off, right?
Yeah, there is something for me personally. There's something about that being a woman turning 40 where I was like, suddenly I'm just less patient about some of these things. Whereas, yeah, when I was 20, it was a very different experience.
It's harder.
It is.
You have insecurities and, you're still finding yourself and you have all these different influences and things like that. And then when you do find yourself in a situation like that, it's just so shocking. Like you said, you do.
Yeah, we don't always have the tools at the time.
Mm-mm.
Like I feel very protective of younger people across
Me
the
too.
gender and identity spectrum and things in the industry, because some of it's mom thing. It's like, especially after becoming a mom, I'm like, everybody looks like a baby to me who's under like the age of 30. So I'm like, babies, just like protect them.
100%.
But also just because it is scary, and having a creative life and career and trying to make those things match up and really loving something and having really unpleasant things happen is it's difficult. And in helping people navigate that somehow feels really important to me, because there are so many young people. I mean, comics is a very like, it's always been that kind of thing where I think it's always attracted people who are younger when they start off, and artistically and things like that. And there's so much out there that's wonderful, and those stories are so important, especially as the world keeps changing and we keep learning and discovering and I think acknowledging more voices, which is so important, because if you don't, boy, things are just like, not only is it important on a human level, also storytelling wise, I know I'm tired of some of the same narratives over and over again. So it's all of those things need to grow as everything else is. So you don't want people to get lost, and you don't want people, even more than lost, you don't want people to get pushed through these kinds of things.
I don't want them to lose their sense of like joy and innocence, because like innocence is something that you only have for a short while, until you become an old cranky jaded 40-year-old.
Right. And the world is depressing and upsetting enough. I feel like especially maybe creative industries, I feel like we have even that much more of a responsibility to, because we deal with those things too within stories. I mean, it's not like stories don't deal with serious things. But we also do a lot of escapism, and we help people process those things. We help them deal with it and contextualize it. And sometimes, it's the only way somebody can process something that otherwise is just too hard. Sometimes doing it through other stories or relating to somebody else's is the thing that helps them get past it in a way or understand themselves. And I think if you're working with something that powerful with that much potential, you owe it to the people that you're communicating with and sharing those things with to be respectful and to treat them well and to be supportive of their creators and not exploit people for the breadth of ways in which that word can be taken. So that's the kind of it's, to me, that's all very, very, very upsetting, as you can tell.
I know it upsets me a lot too, because I can't stand that predatory behavior of like, this is a young innocent person who's trying to make her dreams come true, so I'm gonna exploit that. And
it's really gross. It's a really gross thing. And it's like I said, there's scales of behavior. I've had this conversation with friends and colleagues and stuff. Somebody being awkward once is one thing. Serial predatory behavior is just, it's a thing that's, and not that both circumstances can't result in something awful, but the one behavior, and we do have an unfortunate history of quite a number of people getting away with this for a very long time. And that's very concerning, because like I said, it becomes this generational thing where you have people who, an entire group of 20 something who are now, much older, but went through this, and it affected all of them and in so many different ways. And that's just, you can't quantify that. And that's why I can't, when people are like, how long do you want somebody to suffer? I'm like, I don't want anybody to suffer. I want people to be accountable. There's a huge difference.
Huge difference. Yes. And that I have said that so many times. I'm like, it's not canceling, it's holding people accountable. Now, once they're held accountable, if people choose to boycott their product, that is, their right to exercise their own freedom of speech or their freedom of, action. And the fact that they've just labeled it this cancel culture.
I find that very frustrating, because like I've always looked at the consequences of what I say and what my stories say, and I am sure there is stuff that I have written that I would now go, and just would view very differently, because we learn and express things differently. And so, at some point somebody be like, hey, that story was, and that's fair, but I've never had the luxury of going around without my work being looked at critically or just without consequences to my actions or words. So people being like, well, but they're an artist. I'm like, that's just is not really an excuse.
No.
I think we should be more accountable for those kinds of things in that sense, because we do understand the power of words and creative work and art. And that does not make us less responsible for what we say. I think the recent Bo Burnham special Inside really like hit me in a lot of different ways. Like
Okay. I haven't seen that. I'll have to check that out.
it's definitely really worth it, but it is like, I would be prepared, because it's like Nanette by Hannah Gadsby. It's a really emotional, like punch you in the face kind of experience.
Okay.
But he has a particular song. One of the lines in it, he says, is being self-aware does not mean you're not responsible. That doesn't mean that somehow, like, being self-aware of the fact that you're messed up or that you make mistakes is not absolution. That in and of itself does not absolve you from the things that you've done. And that's really, really true. And I think more of us have to be aware of that, and in our work, and just thinking about it. Doesn't mean like write stories that you think other people want to hear, or never, you know, discuss something difficult. It just means be aware of what you're doing and how you're doing it, and that there are consequences to things, and that's actually how it should be. That's not actually wrong. Like predatory behavior should come with consequences. Like that's not actually a bad thing. And so far, it's just interesting. The fact that people have talked about it and acknowledged it seems to be what some people are like, well, that's it. That's a consequence. And I'm like, it's not though.
Yeah.
It's just awareness. There's a difference. And we still have to get to the consequence.
And there's such a double standard, just even if you look at the individual people that have been supposedly quote unquote canceled. I mean, you have all these, you know, straight male predators that just pop back on Netflix with a comedy show 2 weeks later. And then you've got people like Kevin Spacey, who has been actually canceled, but he's gay. So is it because he's, you know what I mean? You have to look at all these things, like like straight white men.
He has been like and suffered from work and those kinds of things, and who hasn't. And there's also this weird thing. Sometimes people get to this weird thing of like, if they're entitled, like as if people are, well, they're entitled to this work forever. I'm like, well, none of us are really entitled to any of that forever. Like that's just doesn't work like that. And if we, you know, are really objectionable and doing terrible things to people, we definitely don't. So, you know, I always think of all of the people who aren't able to tell their stories, all of the people who left or otherwise just were silenced or just felt that. Those are the people I end up thinking about the most, because for all of the, well, this person got canceled and it was terrible. I'm like, okay, I'll take your word for it. It's so far I haven't really seen much. There's a few exceptions, but not many. Yeah. What I mostly see is the people for whom, you know, they're still thinking about this 10 years later, and all the little ways it impacted their whole life, and trusting other people and their creative life, and, you know, all these kinds of things. And people don't really want to think about that because that's harder. And it's about much longer term things than it is just this like catchy, you know, canceled. And I'm like, yeah, that's not really a thing, but sure.
Right.
You know, it's a thing people have come up with as a very handy, you know, rhetoric based device to silence conversations about things. And you're like, great, okay, well, that's productive. We've definitely learned nothing. Like,
yeah, exactly. And everyone always has an excuse for someone, you know. I mean, it's, you know, I listen to, I watch Bill Maher lately. It's not been I haven't agreed with a lot of the shows. I don't know what's going on there with his weed, as he likes to smoke and claim he does all the time. But I feel like some men especially like pick and choose who they want to support and who they want to cancel, quote unquote. And it's just interesting how, I mean, in Hollywood, you know, there's so many people that have connections and they're friends. And so of course you're going to support your friend and then cancel somebody else that's not your friend. But like you were saying, there's so many people that experience this in different industries that are not public industries, you know, just regular office, corporate jobs, and the restaurant industry.
Just everyday stuff. Yeah.
There's just so much.
There's so much of it. And I think the hardest thing is for people to acknowledge that the conversations aren't easy. It may be about somebody you like and trust and who you've never had an issue with. Those are really hard. But you have to also think about the people who did have the unpleasant experience and how hard that was on them, and how hard it is to come forward about somebody who is well liked and respected, for instance. Like it's pretty easy to come forward about somebody, well, easy is not really the right word, but it's different to come forward about somebody who's like loathed by everybody and people already know is like a terrible person and be like, oh yes, they were terrible. That's at least like, oh, okay, also they were terrible to this person. But somebody who like has a name in something and has a lot of people who speak positively of them and has that kind of power and kind of a thing, to come forward and say that is really not easy. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions people have, that somehow that like it's fun to talk about this stuff, that like anybody is going like, yay, I really want to.
Yeah, I really want to. Well, that's another thing too, is, when there's some people that say, oh, well, you can't believe every woman, maybe she's just trying to get someone. And it's like, no, women don't like to talk about this kind of stuff. We don't make it up.
Nobody really wants to talk about these things. The exceptionally rare circumstances of something like that happen are incredibly rare. And I'm not saying that's right. And yes, we have to acknowledge that has happened, but it always ends up usurping the rest of the conversation, the more important conversation, which is how often it really does happen and how much it is just an unfortunate, common, daily thing for quite a number of people. And that's the stuff that people just don't want to, because that's a much harder thing to solve. That's a way harder, more complicated, structural, personal, just like everything kind of issue, which people never really want to talk about in the complicated terms that they exist in. So yeah, and I look at that through the industry, because I for me, talking about those things is about the fact that I do think comics is better than that. I have some wonderful friends and people who are just truly lovely human beings that I've been lucky enough to know through this industry. And I think the stories that have been told by people are incredibly important. And I think you can see that all over the place, from whether we're talking about Marvel stuff that now has become such a huge and like intense thing that I never would have expected to be invested in, but I absolutely am. To the smaller stories, the autobiographies, the online comics that somebody just tells about, a frog they like, all of those things, though, they add up to the human experience. And I think comics as an industry needs to step up, because if we're going to be this art form that really does have a lot of importance and meaning, which it does, we have to be willing to treat the people making it and reading it as human beings. Like, it's just,
it's like that
decency.
It's that old adage, put your money where your mouth is. Like, you're coming out, and preaching, oh, we're trying to be inclusive and empower women and empower, all these different, cultures and groups of people, but then turning a blind eye and silent and keeping silent when people are coming to you and saying, hey, this is, someone did this,
something is wrong here.
That's just,
it isn't easy. I would never claim that it's easy to hear about people doing awful things. I mean, it's not, but it is also, at this point, I do feel like with everything that's come out about different people in all sorts of industries, it should be a thing where people shouldn't be that skeptical that it's possible. You know what I mean? Like maybe you're like, I got to read about this particular situation before I can make a judgment. Okay, fine. But like, incredulous that it's a thing that exists seems a little outside of what is very clearly reality at this point, where it's just like, sadly, this is just so common. And that's the part that always makes me really sad, because I don't want other people to have had some of the experiences I have and the experiences of friends of mine. And you look at that and you just go, ugh, like, I don't want people to have that. And you definitely shouldn't have that because you like comics. Like, that's just not,
that's
like,
not
those are not experiences. Like, no one should have them. And the idea to me sometimes, it's like, because I really love this storytelling medium, I have to be put through this hellish experience. Like, absolutely not. No,
that's not fair to anyone. And I think it was, and I could be completely wrong on this, so don't quote me, but I think it was Delilah S. Dawson that she had tweeted, this is a while ago, saying how she had this, and it could not be her, I may be getting this wrong, but as some very prominent woman in comics said, I would love to have a like a thing at Comic Cons, like a forum or like a room where if a woman was feeling unsafe, or anyone feeling unsafe for that matter, but specifically geared towards women, there would be like people there. You could go into a room and say, hey, like, someone's making me uncomfortable. And I thought that was a really cool and amazing idea to do. I would love to see that happen.
There's been a lot of discussion, people trying to figure out the sort of logistics of so many of those things, which sounds absurd, but there has been for years now, I think, I know, different creators have said, like, if you are feeling uncomfortable and unsafe and I'm tabling at a show, please come talk to me and I will see what we can do and help with staff, because, it is really daunting to, especially in a convention, big stuff going on and huge, things, to have something happen. Like, I've had things happen in those situations and it's very overwhelming and you're like, I don't really know what to do at the moment.
Oh, yeah.
So if you can feel safe, like at this point, I mean, I'm I've become so wary of people that, like, I don't recommend anybody in a sort of like, this person is guaranteed safe because so many people have different experiences with people. But usually other moms, I'm usually like, you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
Like approaching a mom, like it sounds like something I would tell my daughter, like, look for a mom with children or something. If somebody's, like, it just, but it's true in a way, because I feel like there's just more receptive to those kinds of things. But there's been some discussions on how to make some of that stuff work. And I know certain conventions have definitely put forward better harassment policies and things like that, because there is an awful lot of stuff that happens in those environments.
Yeah.
Which I think definitely says something about those environments, and the kind of atmosphere that they can create. So it is important that those policies be there so people can at least report stuff. It's so hard though, because so many of these things happen. And I've said this often where I'm like, people always want proof. And I'm like, I wish that it worked like that, where like everything happened in a convenient spot where there was like video and recording.
Yeah, your phone
like
just ready. Yeah.
Like, that would be super. But an awful lot of stuff that happens just happens way outside of ever being able to do that. Like, my first Comic-Con, I got groped by a well-known creator, and like, there's no way for me to prove that. Nobody else saw it. There was no, like, I didn't take a picture, like there's no, so I'm like, other than me saying that's the thing that happened, it's not something that I can prove that way. And usually the response to stuff like that from a lot of people is just like, well, just get over it. And it's like, I mean, I'd love to, and I don't spend every day thinking about it, but it's still something that happened and it had an impact. And I'm not ashamed of the fact that negative things that have happened had an influence on me, and they are something that I think about. I just, as a person, I think that's pretty natural and normal. So it's like, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. And I mean, just, it happens so often. I mean, I don't know one single woman, including myself, that has never been groped by a stranger, or even just someone that you knew of who was maybe a celebrity and you thought was, because I think there is a misconception too, because if you think someone's famous, that they're safe, right?
Right. That they're going to be, and no, unfortunately,
no, oftentimes not actually. And
that's the hardest thing is like, I would really hope that people would see me as a safe person. And I think in general, I'm, for instance, very short. Like, I'm not a threatening looking person, that's for sure. But like, I can say, I've definitely had professional interactions where things did not go great, and it's entirely possible that somebody feels negatively towards me because of that. And, I may feel that's unfair, but it's not for me to decide for somebody else. They get to decide that. And I think it's just, it's something where you have to look at yourself and how you conduct yourself and go, okay, it's a low bar, but I know I have never serially predated on people or ever conducted myself in such a way. Like, again, it's a ridiculous bar to have to even say, but no, I know that. Can I say I've always said the right thing, or that it's not possible that somebody just had a negative experience and I was not the right editor for them or something like that? No, it's likely that I was, because that happens within creative collaborative situations. And you have to be willing to accept that somebody may just not like you, or that you just were not the right fit for them. And it was for them a toxic situation. And that sucks. Like, you don't want to think of yourself that way, but it's making sure you also do understand it doesn't necessarily make you a toxic person. It just means that situation did not work for anybody, and it just was not the right fit, and that's okay. And hopefully, you can move on from that and find a way to either approach that person about, hey, I'm sorry we didn't work well together, and hopefully somebody else will be the right fit, or those kinds of things. But I think people do need to look at their own conduct more too. I mean, a lot, and I myself, I know this too. I can be very self-righteous sometimes and have to go, it's not like everything I've ever written is perfect. It's not like I'm sure I have screwed up, some things. So you have to be willing to learn and grow from that, and do the work yourself and not expect other people to do it for you, I think is also really important. Because
Yeah.
there is that kind of thing of like, teach me how to be a better person. And I'm like, I think we can all do that on our own.
Right. We work on ourselves and
Yeah, I
yeah.
think that's kind of important.
Yeah, it's especially, yeah, like when you do have, a public platform and I'm,
Mhm.
I'm obviously have one as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, you do have to sometimes, look at what you're saying and look at the verbiage
Yeah.
and sometimes, you say the wrong thing or you put your foot in your
Yeah.
mouth and it's okay to do that because I feel like those are types of mistakes that we do actually learn from.
I do too. I try to
Yeah.
leave things up, if somebody goes, hey, that was, weird, I'll go, you know what? Take a step back from the defensiveness
Right.
and go, you know what, you're right. That was the wrong thing to say. I should not have done that. The actual right thing is this. And, that's an important thing because I do think we are all afraid of making mistakes and people are afraid of that kind of stuff. And I do understand that. I don't like making mistakes either.
Right.
But I think if you're an honest person, and I think if you express those things and you are willing to learn and you are willing to have made mistakes and say, I was wrong, and just I was wrong, not
Yeah.
I was wrong, but I meant, just
Right.
I was wrong. That was the wrong thing.
That's it. Yeah.
I do think most people look at that and are like, thank you. And that's what they wanted. They don't need a big, long thing. They just want you to say, you know what? I was wrong. I will fix that
Yeah.
and that way of thinking, and I will move on from there and do better.
Yeah. And
I do think most
educate
people
yourself
like
too. I think that's a big part of it. If there's anytime anything I don't understand, whatever,
Mhm.
whatever it may be, I like to learn about it and
Take your
read
time. You don't have to comment on everything right away. You can go read about
go read about it
and-
first before you have like
yeah,
a
and I
knee-jerk
think if we look at
reaction.
our own, I think a lot of that's true too. Looking at our own reactions, like I think if our first reaction to something is sort of either defensive or I don't understand this, I think it's a good idea to sit with that for a while and figure out why,
Yeah.
and to really think about like where that's coming from and what the background of that can be. And I also I do try to remind myself too, I don't have to comment on everything. There's plenty of things in which I'm not the right person to make a statement. And try to be more mindful of those kinds of things, because when we're angry or frustrated or cranky, it's easy to say things sometimes. I've said things in the past that where I look at and I go, oof, that was just like snarky for no reason and
Right.
totally unproductive. And and just I'm like, I'm better than that. Like I know that that's not okay, and I know that that's not the way to express something, and that there was just nothing to do and I was just having a bad day or something like that. But that's still that's an excuse. It's still just, you know what, don't do that. Just
Right.
moving forward.
Yeah.
Cat
And
down
there's
on that particular urge to comment in a snarky way
to
when there's
everything.
no
Yeah.
reason to,
No,
and
for
just,
sure.
you know,
There's still some hot button issues too where when it comes to like politics and stuff like that, which I just don't address on social media because there are certain things that no matter what, when you're tweeting about it, all you're doing is you're basically showing, your followers that you agree with them, you're on the same side, but you're not changing anyone's mind that's on the other side. So it kind of just becomes redundant and just gets your blood pressure going, I think sometimes.
Yeah, I definitely have been trying to, especially recently from new projects and stuff I'm working on, taking several day-long breaks, and stuff, which I think is good for mental health in general, because the bombardment of information, as much as I want to be informed, being informed, but feeling pummeled at the same time is just exhausting. And then it makes it harder to focus on the things that you can do something about. And you can end up feeling as if there's nothing you can do, when in fact they're just smaller things. And, you can't necessarily solve this one big problem right now, but you can, with a little time and your energy not completely gone, use your skills or something in another way. That's like with literary tarot and this other thing, it's like, oh, okay, I cannot solve the climate crisis by myself. No, but I can hopefully help contribute to a project that helps make some smaller, meaningful changes that do result in things improving in places that we can make that kind of connection and solution. Because it can feel very flailing and just like, I don't know what to do and
what's going on.
is,
Yeah. And I think that's great that you work on projects that do have a purpose. I mean, other than, a purpose for entertaining people is perfect
It's
on
fine,
its own.
of course. Yeah, I enjoy that too. But
but just also know that there's organizations that are, championing environmental causes and literacy and things like that.
And literacy is such an important one too. I think is such a core experience, and understanding the world is helped so much through literacy and reading comprehension and storytelling and things like that. So anything with that, and I, like I said, with Brink doing, I love how they have it sort of in different areas to help different groups of people too, which is really nice, because I think not that one focus is a bad thing, but it is nice to see that there's a variety of ways that something is applied and can help and things like that, and what a difference that can make sort of immediately. Like I live in Los Angeles, and we have a lot of local problems that by focusing a little bit more on local politics and on more of those kinds of things, they're able to have a more immediate impact on and do something about, trying to do a little bit more of those kinds of things, because it can get very like big and overwhelming and scary, and it is, but then there are things you can do like right next door that you can actually see a more meaningful sort of thing right there. So trying to do that, try to set an example like that for my daughter too, because I think art as escape, as entertainment is great, but art also as meaning and communication is also really important. So
therapy really too.
Oh yeah, I mean, because the thing is, like, it hopefully helps other people, but it helps yourself. So there is a selfish motivation a little bit. But I think it's not a terrible one, wanting to do things that make you feel a little better.
Out of all the things you could do, that's terrible.
That are sort of more selfishly motivated. It's like, okay, this one I can live with as a thing. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And as you were saying, I think, living in LA, and I'm not far from there, but like local stuff, like I think grassroots is kind of like, if you are feeling like, oh my God, what do I do? This is such a big deal. This is a global issue, but starting at grassroots is really how you can feel, I think, some kind of satisfaction. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And connection to where you are. Like I said, like literacy is important and education to me. So those are areas where I've been able to put a lot more energy and look at that. Or there's groups like the Trevor Project, where what they're doing and how they connect with people and the impact that they can make for younger folks, like more immediately, and be an outreach, and kind of thing. Like that's the kind of stuff that's it feels like it's a more, I don't know, manageable, not exactly the right word, but there's more of a direct connection, where there's a more like where you can sort of see that it having a benefit to people. And that's something I think, being able to get involved with those kinds of things consistently and feel that kind of stuff. And you're going to have setbacks no matter what. I mean, that's going to happen.
Yeah, 100%.
But feeling like there's some progress, and that there's people who are always willing to keep fighting for those things, I think that helps a lot. It definitely helps with I think, especially for a lot of us the past like year and a half, that sort of hopeless feeling was, I think, pretty widespread. And so it became that much more important to try to connect things, either with my work or just anything that I was involved with, that there was something going on there that felt a little bit more meaningful. Because for me, it's definitely changed the way I approach those things. Like I'm definitely less likely to be flip about certain kinds of stuff than I think I was before, just because again, I think the internet kind of stuff, it's easy to be kind of flip and snarky, because it's like, oh, yay, engagement, and then afterwards you're like, what was the point of that? Like, did that do anything? Really? And I'm not saying like, don't share like a cute cat picture, like please do.
Right.
But, or that you're never going to like lapse and be snarky or something, but just trying to be more of a connecting kind of thing, and less just snark for snark's sake. Like, I think talking about something meaningfully is fine, but I think just kind of just being sort of insulting about somebody else's work, or like dismissive. And in general, I'm like, this helps nothing and nobody, and it does not make anything more inclusive or better. Right. So I'm just going to really try to leave that attitude. Like, go snark at a friend. You know what I mean? Like, talk to your friend and just be like, that's
exactly
fine. I don't think you need to share that with everybody potentially.
No, and it's funny you mentioned that. I do have a good author friend of mine who, anytime I do feel that need to be like, somebody rubbed me the wrong way or I'm pissed off about something, I always will message her first and say, should I comment? Should I post? And she's like, nope, just leave it alone.
I think Mickey Kendall said that on Twitter, where she was like, everybody should have their friend group, your Discord channel, where you go and say the thing.
Right.
And then they can be like, agree and all those things, that also be like, do not post that
Do
for
not,
your own mental health,
do not let a billion people see this.
right. And I think that's a pretty good lesson for all of us. I think, like,
Mhm.
just because you can share it with everybody does not mean you necessarily
You
should.
yeah.
And remembering that everybody can see it, like,
Right.
I think is a good thing. I haven't had like many things go like viral or anything, but once or twice I've had like a couple of things have much larger, kinds of stuff. And they were definitely like weird. Like, it feels very weird and exposed.
Mhm.
And
It does.
so yeah, I think
It-
it's definitely something where for my personality, that kind of exposure is strange feeling, and it's definitely very like, ooh, I don't think I like that very much. It just in the sense of like, I prefer smaller, more like intimate, kind of thing, and not necessarily the entire world commenting.
Yeah, well, that's so funny that you mentioned that, because I think like before it happens to you, you're kind of like, oh, this why do these tweets go viral and mine don't, or whatever. And you think, oh, that's so cool. They're getting so much attention. And then, I interviewed someone controversial and I got trolled for it. And not, it was me and another host from the podcast, but we're media. We give a platform, and it wasn't controversial in a sense of where they would be subject to like cancel culture. It was just they have a lot of people that don't like them. And so I got trolled afterwards, and all of a sudden the likes and the retweets kept going and going. And I was like, oh my God, no, please stop retweeting this. Please stop liking it, because I just wanted it to go away. It made me so uncomfortable. So now I'm like, I don't want to go viral.
Yeah, no, I definitely, it's I do sometimes feel like for me, sometimes it's been good to get certain things off my chest or discuss things. And I've learned a lot over the years. I think my Twitter thing, which is like, it's your anniversary. And I'm like, God, I don't think I want to know how long I've been on here. And that like, I've probably written like several novels worth of content on here where I should have been writing a novel. Like, it's,
right, exactly.
there's that kind of thing. But yeah, it's funny because I look at that and I think, I think it's important to say things, but I think people also need to realize that, like, say what you're comfortable saying. Don't feel like you have to comment on everything, even if other people expect you to, because you have to sort of gauge what's right for you and what kind of attention you're comfortable getting, because there's so much we can't control. And, you cannot control when something like that might just take off. And like, sometimes it is the weirdest thing where you're like, why is that a thing that just, okay,
Right.
and it's fine. And then other times it's something where like, boy, I was really not looking forward to these kinds of messages in my inbox. Like, I could have dealt with not that today, So I think I try to remind myself of that. I'm like, do I want trolling for this? Like, am I okay with that? Will I be able to just go block and don't care?
Right.
I'm like, or will this really bother me? And it's a good gauge sometimes, I think.
Yeah. And I think sometimes in the moment you think, oh, I'll be fine. And then the minute you start getting those weird ones, you're like,
oh,
your heart's like in your throat and you're like, okay, never mind him. And I've
the
I've
weird
deleted
anxiety
tweets.
flush where you're like, oh, I suddenly feel really off. Yeah. Super fun.
Horrible. It's a horrible feeling. And that's why it's a good reminder, also just to step away from social media for a while at times.
Taking a break is, I think, very, very important.
Yeah.
And I know it's easier for me to say than it is for other people. But I think that any kind of a break that anyone can take, where you can just like, and really take the break, like just don't have it on your phone, don't, is good, because I do think, especially when you are starting to feel that blood pressure thing and that constant kind of agitation about it, it's definitely impacting all of us. And it's surprising how quickly you suddenly start to feel clearer and less tense.
Anxiety,
and it's not that you don't care about a thing anymore, but you're able to see it a little bit more clearly, and a lot of times find ways to be much more helpful and productive than just being angry on the internet. Which, I think expressing those things in awareness is like a good step, but I don't think it's the solution to something. And I think it's finding those ways where it's, for me, that's been a big thing. An author that I know, Sarah Kuhn, just wrote a really important piece, I think, about her experience, as an Asian American, and what that's been like during this past year, and just a lot of awful experiences that she's had. And a lot of what she talked about was her anger and the constant pressure to push that down and not be angry. And I think, and that what she really came to through the course of writing one of her books was that it wasn't about not being angry, but it was about finding a more productive way to channel the anger for her character and for herself. It's a really profound piece, which I hope people read. It's I think the book that this particular thing was from Tokyo with Love, but she's done a lot of different stuff. She's she's done some comics work too, and she's just an incredible person. But so hopefully I'm not getting the book wrong that's about.
Right.
But anyway, it was a piece that she just came out the other day, and it's really important from her personal experience of these things, and finding those ways to take that anger and frustration and use it in a way that's productive for you, I think is really important. And I hope more people are able to do that. That's what I'm definitely trying to do. I mean, it sounds strange, but bringing it back to Ash and Thorn, a lot of Ash and Thorn was written in frustration over the election and things that were going on. And I used cosmic horror to channel it in the Low Ladies.
As we do.
that was there. And how much people will get that out of it is, entirely up to the reader. But yeah, for me personally, a lot of that stuff is there.
Yeah. And that's, I think a lot of creators really, channeled that frustration for various things, whether it was, the election from 2016 to just the protests and the awful opposition to those protests and the way things were handled. And I think a lot of creators did channel that last year. And so, if anything, I feel like we have come out somewhat on a better note. There's so much work to do. And luckily, though, we didn't end up with the same, president. But
yeah,
thank God.
That does make a difference. And then we can push and fight for the things that we need to. Yeah, what I often say is, and it was something that John Lewis would say, which is really that it's about the work and that it's not ever done. You're never done with the work of equality and getting things better, because there's always more to be done, but that it is about that. And the fact that someone like him could still have so much hope, I think was always something that, I don't know, deeply moved me. And I think, it was one of the reasons why he is somebody who is such an influence and important person in so many people's lives, politically and, in other ways, because, he is somebody who struggled with things that I have never had to deal with, and to still have that hope and to still say that the fight is what matters, and you just keep going, even when it really doesn't feel like you have, like, that it's going to make a difference. You keep pushing and you keep going. And I think that's, I try to do that, in my own life. Hopefully that doesn't sound like arrogant, because I'm not comparing myself to John Lewis, but
no, I get your point.
That's like a really incredible human being who did like these remarkable things, and I write comic books. So like, I'm not equating those things, but
he's inspired you.
Yeah. But that idea there, that it is always about the fight, and it's about keeping that going and finding the ways that you can make a difference. And speaking of my child having some fun in the background there.
She's like, pay attention to me now.
Where are you? Yeah,
I know. Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. And yeah, I think we can all make a difference, even if it's small. Change doesn't happen overnight. Revolutions don't happen overnight. And if everyone just said, if I, nothing's going to happen with just me, then we wouldn't have the rights that we have now.
Exactly.
So
just collective action is, and it starts at the personal, and it moves from there.
Yeah.
And if we can all find things that we are passionate about, because we can care about multiple things at once, but it is hard to focus on multiple things at once.
Right.
I think finding that balance and finding those ways to do that. So whether it's through your work or through advocacy or things that you work with, I think we can all find ways to do that. And yeah, I mean, everybody that I know, all the artists that I know, and creators and different colleagues and stuff, and I think are definitely feeling that really strongly, this year. I mean, it's not that people weren't feeling that way, but it was it was a rough couple of years before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And then that kind
of a lot of day drinking now.
Yeah, so there was a lot, that kind of happens, and those things impact creativity and being able to feel like you can express anything, or how you're doing it, or whether it's gonna, be meaningful or in that kind of way. And so I think a lot of us, I think 100%. We're doubting ourselves during all that too, of like, is anything I'm doing useful?
Well, yeah, and it's just that all of a sudden we kind of all, took this collective sigh of relief, which I felt like we all deserve to take for, whatever 2 seconds. And like you said, it doesn't mean that we're giving up
No,
on
and
any
it's just
progress. It was just like, we've had, like you were saying, for 2 years prior, we had all this tension and craziness that we had to deal with. And so yeah, it was like we kind of earned this, like,
a couple of couple of breaths and then back to it. Yes.
and back to the work. Yeah, absolutely. And I think no, I think it's great that creators like yourself are, wanting to make a difference and whatever way you can, whether it's, doing the tarot card for literacy, or, working on your environmental project. It
I
just
hope I can
speaks
do more stuff
volumes.
with younger artists and things too, because I've been able to do some stuff like that in the past, and I've done some work for younger audiences, obviously some for older audiences and stuff. But I always feel like, especially watching my daughter grow up and her just unbelievable creativity, because kids' brains just work in fascinating ways. And I'm just like, wow, if we could tap into that, like, goodness. But yeah, I feel like more things for kids and like that, really helping them find their voices and things, is something that I know a lot of people that I work with who are also parents and things like that feel the same way, where the more impact you can make, especially now that people have seen what teachers have been doing and having
oh my gosh, poor people.
Yeah, so I think there's that too, of all the things that we've had to do ourselves and reach out to others for help and figure all of that stuff out the past year has definitely I think hopefully taking quite a few things for granted will happen less.
Yeah, I hope so.
Just how much more obvious and how important they are. So
yeah, I hope, I guess I hope we don't forget, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know our attention span can be kind of short on things. I know that there's things where I'm like, God, that did happen in the last year, and I'm like, a lot of things have happened. Like when you list it out, you're like, oh geez, like this past year and the couple of years before, it did feel like several decades worth of stuff crammed into one smaller amount of time. So I don't think that. Yeah, I mean, and I know lots of things happen every year in every generation. It's not that, but it did feel and still feels like a lot,
It does.
And a lot of that's just the access that we have. I mean, we're aware of things happening as they happen now, which wasn't the same even 10 years ago in the same way. So it's, those things are always shifting.
Yeah, that's the thing is we have so much access to these different social media sites, and there's just cameras everywhere. Everyone has a smartphone. Everyone's taking things, video of them in real time. And, a lot of these, like, injustices that we see now are they're not new. It's just that we see them more because people are actually being able to, record them and stuff like that. So I definitely think there's pros and cons, right, to technology and all that good stuff. I mean, you get to,
and there's no putting that particular, it's like Pandora's box, like you can't put them back.
Right.
So you have to deal with them. Like they're already there. So you have to go, okay, what are we going to do about this particular crazy little demon of social media? And like, how do we figure that out? We're still definitely trying to figure that out. I look at my daughter and for me, it's a lot of that. It's like how to balance it. Like, I don't want to keep her away from all of those things, because trying to isolate people from it does not work. And then they're not prepared for it when they are exposed. At the same time, you don't want that overexposure and that stuff that they're just super not ready for, that can do all kinds of, damage and stuff. So there's a balance. Thankfully, she's tech savvy, in I think in her age, in like an appropriate way. But we do, curate stuff. Like we're careful about those things, because I don't think she should be exposed to just every old thing everywhere. And there should be waste stuff is
like TikTok and
yeah, like I think that's just like there's certain things that like she just does not have access to, because I'm like, a 6-year-old just is not going to be able to handle that stuff. And a lot of it she wouldn't even be aware of, but like it still gets in there. That's the other thing you learn as a parent, is like that whole thing about how they're sponges is not an exaggeration.
Really? Okay.
Oh yeah, no, not at all. And their memories are intense. So you will find yourself facing the thing you said 3 years ago that you were frustrated, and you're just like, whoa. So yeah, once you see those things in like a little teeny person who you feel very protective of, a lot of that stuff, because like I'm Gen X, we grew up with both, not that stuff and then that stuff happening. So it's
it was like a weird thing for us, because we didn't have it at all, and then by the time it came, we were not old, but like we were old. We were at a certain age where we weren't as spongy. You know what I mean? Like our brains weren't really absorbing a lot of it. I think, there obviously technology the generation.
Yeah, and it was different because it was just starting really with
it was like
stuff
dial up and
much more like, kind of, so when I look at it now versus what it's like now, I'm like, holy yikes, how much we've just shifted with it, and just kind of go like, yeah, now it's like this. And then I look back and I go, I had like a rotary phone when I was a kid.
I had a beeper.
Yeah, like just a phone. What are you talking about? Like, well, I wouldn't have a cell phone, and then it became this normal thing in my 20s. Yeah, it's
it's bizarre when I tell you, and I don't feel old until I tell a 20-something-year-old that I didn't have my first phone until I was 21, and they were like, what?
They look at you like,
what's
like, wrong with you,
dinosaur?
Yeah.
And
I'm like, I'm ancient, don't worry about it.
Exactly. Well,
right, and I know 42 actually isn't, but like
no.
sometimes with the way how quickly things move, I think sometimes some things
feels like it
sometimes.
Yeah, it does. And I know I keep trying to, I've never had an issue with age ever. When I turned 30, 35, I was like, yeah, I'm in my 30s. And and I don't know if it's because I turned 41 in a pandemic that all of a sudden everything was like, oh my God. And
it does change it a bit, doesn't it? Yeah.
It does. Yeah. And I do feel at times older.
But 41 and 42 I had during this, and I was like, this feels weird. 40 was before, so I'm glad, I guess, because of the, and like I didn't feel like a totally different person or anything like that, but I definitely did notice the past few years a certain degree of just like, you know what? No.
Yeah, 40 was fun. I had a big party. And then 41 was my birthday's in April, so literally 4 weeks into the pandemic. Yeah. And then I was just celebrated another birthday on lockdown, and I thought, oh wow, this is getting to be routine, and I'm not really liking it.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to get back into society again, because
and finding the ways to do it, and like I think things have changed, so I feel differently about certain stuff too. And I'm a more introverted person. But like a couple weeks ago, we were able to have a small gathering, with friends, went to their house, and it was really lovely to see other people's faces and people who I care about and like very much, and just sort of sit with a fire pit and just like talk about nothing that, and everything, and it was very, it was funny afterwards. Everybody was like, that was so soothing and lovely and like a balm after all of this. It was no pressure. It wasn't like a part, it was just this very just like calm, just a bunch of artists and writers sitting together talking about just whatever stuff kind of came up. And it was a very nice human connecting kind of a thing. And that did feel very nice after this whole.
That sounds amazing.
Thing. Yeah, it was very nice where it was just like that, because that is very, you forget, I think, until all this happened, like, oh yeah, no, I mean, even introverted, I still like saw human beings. Right? I still like went to dinner with a friend, like I still like did those things. So yeah, it's a big reminder of certain things. Like I said, not to take certain things for granted. I really, really will try not to do that as much. I know it's kind of human nature too sometimes, but those kind of events that happen like this, I think you sort of have to go, boy, I really need to appreciate certain things and get my butt kicked about other stuff too, and just sort of hopefully come out of it with something to offer, I hope.
Yeah. I take stock and figure it out, and a lot of self-reflection, I'm sure, for a lot of people in the past 2 years. And but yeah, like you were saying, it's one thing to be an introvert and be like, I don't want to go out, but then when someone
by choice,
someone's like, no, you can't,
no, you literally cannot.
It's a little different.
That's trapped. A very different feeling. Yeah, that's a lot of my friends, fellow arty introverts were like, yeah, it's a big difference between this just being how I want to do things and it being like I have to do this and I can't just take a break and do this thing or that, just to take your mind off it for a bit. It's like, nope, it's just here.
Hence all the baking and the knitting.
I think that was definitely a big part of it. People was like, I got to do something. And baking is like, it's very creative actually. When you start poking around at it and fiddling with things. That's what I like doing. Like, I know there's certain aspects of it that are very like science, like you need to put certain things together so that the thing works. But with flavor, you can definitely get creative, and that's what I have.
Now I just have to lose my pandemic weight that I gained from all of the baking that I enjoyed.
I figure it's a mark that all of us survived, and I'm just so glad to see people's faces that like, everybody I've seen, I'm like, you're beautiful. I love you. It's great. I'm so happy. I don't, I can be hard on myself about that stuff. And I've tried to be as forgiving as possible because it's, it's just a big traumatic thing. I'm like, I figure weight gain's the least of my worries coming out of this. Like if I stayed mostly sane and like kept my family healthy, I'm like, I've done a good job there.
Yeah.
Anything else I can work on. Yeah,
absolutely. We survived the apocalypse.
Whew, yeah, at least this one we've done.
Yeah, so far.
Yeah, I joke, but yeah, it's very much so.
Well, I for one have had a blast talking to you. I think you're so
Me too. Thank you.
Incredible and smart and funny and
thank you. That's
I just loved it.
You're lovely. So this was great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming on. And I'm excited to read Ash and Thorn and just and to see what else you create, going forward.
Yes, I do have things. I am in that awkward place that many people find themselves in publishing where you have things that you're working on and you cannot talk about any of it.
I'm used to that.
I have actually really big project that I'm working on. I'm very excited about. And, but yes, it's something I cannot say.
Can't talk about
anything more than like, it's a thing that's happening. But so that's why I am glad that there are these other things that I actually, worked on that I can go, it's there and it's funding. Yay. So it's nice to least have that. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, when you can announce it, you'll have to come back on and chat about it. And and then also the literary tarot. I mean, for people listening, definitely check that out. I know there's like 5 days left, I think, in the Kickstarter for it. And and then hopefully after the Kickstarter is all wrapped up, I want to say that Miss Headland said maybe about 8 months to a year before it hits the the actual market where we can purchase it. So I'm excited.
But it is showing the progress and all the art. There's been lots of great releases for the cards so far. It's a tarot deck, so it is huge. Yeah. But yeah, it's pretty great. I'm so excited to see it all. I'm really excited for my copy. It's like I have a feeling it's going to be one of those things where I'm going to like frame most of the cards or something. It's going to be pretty beautiful.
I love that. Yeah, I'm definitely getting a copy as well. And well, thank you again for coming on. This has been great. If anyone, I love your Twitter handle. Tired Fairy is so.
It's awesome. An oldie, but still relevant, I guess.
I love it. So everyone go follow Tired Fairy as well. That's me. Yeah, thank you.
Come for the literary conversations and stay for the random Lord of the Rings facts that you did not ask for.
Oh, fun!
That will happen.
That's awesome.
Yep.
Another fun fact about you. Okay.
Yep.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Mariah.
Thank you.
You'll have to definitely come back on again. I've really enjoyed this, and you are an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Spaghetti! And we're back.
That's right. We are back. Back in the saddle again. Well, I hope you guys really, really enjoyed that as much as we did making it for you. And if you like what you heard and you want to hear more, you got to go check out Spoilerverse.com, because at Spoilerverse.com, we have a plethora amazing directors and artists of all walks of life and editors and writers. And oh my God, are you a lover of comic books like we are? Then there's so many amazing people from the comic book world over at Spoilerverse.com. And I highly implore you to go there and check it out.
Yeah, and while you're there, you can check out all the other podcasts on our network, like Bridging the Geekdoms and Funny Book Forensics and Haphazard Adventures and Nerds from the Crypt and so many more.
Misery
we put out
Point
episodes
Radio.
all the time. Go check all of them out. And check out all of the reviews and previews and articles we have going up every single day for you. Every day on Spoilerverse.com for you to check out and to read and to love and to like and to comment. We have a store link. If you want to help support the site, you can do it two ways. One, go to our Patreon, which is patreon.com/spoilercountry, or go to our store link in the middle of the site there and get a t-shirt, a face mask, a hoodie, something, look fly as hell, and help support the site when you do that, because we get $1 or $2. And, maybe you want to talk to us. If you do, you can do it obviously on all the socials, but if you go to scpod.us/Discord, you can join our public Discord server and come.
What's going on, everyone? Are you still looking for that perfect one-stop shop for all things pop culture? That one place where you can hear hot takes about superheroes, Star Wars, video games, and more? Well, fear not. Bridging to Geekdoms is the place for you. a podcast that focuses on the current rumors, scoops, and controversies within the pulp culture world. Hosted exclusively on the Spoilerverse Network, you can find us on any one of your favorite podcatching apps, YouTube, and at spoilerverse.com. So don't miss out on the excitement. Find us and subscribe now.
Do you listen to podcasts that sound like this? Hey, welcome back to the Super OK Podcast, where our audio sounds mediocre.
Or do you prefer podcasts that sound more like this? Crisp, clear, fun, easy to listen to, and full of awesomeness? Well, then you should check out Spoiler Country, hosted exclusively over at spoilerverse.com.